They tell us lies that we're not good enough. They put thoughts in our minds that we should just give up. But I just put my gut suit on and I look up and I shine. Shine, shine, guitar.
And welcome to our podcast where we are going to dive deep into the dark side of reality, where the battle of good versus evil comes alive, and everything you think you know about demons, demonic possession, human behavior, and the eternal struggle for your soul will become in question. Yes. A few weeks ago, I had this interesting idea. I thought about the hundreds of podcasts I've been invited on over the years, and it's been literally hundreds. I'm always the special guest, never the host. So this is my first and hopefully many more podcasts that will be coming on a monthly basis. And the first thing I want you to do is just share a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to start introducing our guest, and they're all so impressive. I'm telling you, I'm not easily impressed, but these guys, whoa, are they impressive? Okay, let's go. Let me just dive into myself. I've been in the ministry for 47 years, and I've done analytical case assessments, psychological interpretations, and supernatural behavior analysis for thousands of cases worldwide over the past 40 years. It's been like almost 5 decades. I could attest to the fact that diabolical experiences are real and demonic possession is a true phenomenon. Back in the 1980s, I created this analytical process that is now being used in all of our various jurisdictions. We have members in 24 countries, and they have actually following the process. And the process is very analytical. We have to make sure that what we're dealing with is the real thing. That is, it's a real, true demonic type of scenario. If it's not, well, then we rely on our psychiatrist and medical community to jump in and tell us, give us some suggestions as to what avenues we should explore from that point on. But anyway, again, I'm so excited about this because my guests are so special. And they're probably, and you probably know them because they're not strangers to the spotlight. I'm going to first emphasize that this podcast is not for everyone. Demonic possession is a very emotional, very private, very it's very seclusive in the event that you should want to listen to it. And if you get upset, emotionally moved, or you feel you can't handle the rest, by all means, feel free to drop out, and that is to just simply sign off, because what we're going to be talking about will be things that are real, and we have all can attest to the fact we've been witnessed, and we know more than most people in regards to what to expect when we're talking about a supernatural event, especially when it comes in regards to our very person. Okay, let's see. What we're going to do is I'm going to first address our first guest. I'm going to introduce our first guest, and I'm so excited and blessed to introduce my 5 special guests. But this fellow here, he happens to be a consultant, and he's a psychiatrist. And I'm so pleased to meet him, Dr. Sanjay Jain, MD. Doctor, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and tell the audience what your feelings are in regards to the approach of our type of ministry as a psychiatrist? What is your perspective? And is there anything that you could perhaps clear for us as to your approach?
Oh, hi, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be on this podcast. and I'm really pleased to see so many of us here having a participation in this podcast today. So basically, just a bit of a background about me. I'm a psychiatrist. My training was predominantly done in UK. And I practiced as a psychiatrist for over 15 years in United Kingdom. My specialization predominantly is in geriatric psychiatry, but I do cover quite a lot of adult psychiatry as well as other subspecialty while doing the on-calls. So that's in a nutshell. That's my brief intro in terms of what I do. Now, demonic possession and psychiatry. All I'm going to say at this introduction is that they're quite poles apart at the moment because one of the Christian organization, which is the Christian Medical Fellowship, I am also part of that. As a Christians in psychiatry, we really have quite an important responsibility, really. We need to be well informed of the evidence of mental disorder. So mental disorder can be anything, which is a disease of brain or mind or the impairment of mind, and how that translates really into some of the behavioral challenges, some of the patients or my patients' experiences, So I have to really take a very balanced approach as a psychiatrist, because at the end of the day, the most important thing for me is the patient's safety, because quite commonly, patients with things like self-harming behavior, they're those who are really acutely psychotic, they may very well have a genuine genetic contribution or environmental contribution or anything per se. But then we need to ensure that we also approach, because psychiatry is not the only answer for all the things we see and we hear. And I'm a firm believer in that. And as a Christian myself, when I gave my life to Christ over 2 decades ago, it's been an eye-opener for me that as you go into mental health and try to bring about the mainstream line mental health into the Christian faith or any faith really, we need to bring healing. We need to show love and care for patients, and the most important thing is we need to deal with this stigma, which is associated with the mental illness. I remember Matthew 8:1-4 says that just as Jesus showed compassion for those who were stigmatized by physical illness. So we need to have a very open approach. And I'm not going to say that the psychiatry is all about evidence, because there are certain things we have no answers to. But the only thing which I do know is that the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry, which is like a holy grail for psychiatrists, to be honest. We rely on that heavily to diagnose patients, and even though there is a trance and possession disorder, which was mentioned in DSM-4, the previous version, but DSM kind of moved quite far apart from the challenges we face if they're unable to explain the symptoms. So in a nutshell, it's a challenging job for me. When I get a case referred to me by your order, I have to be really very mindful of the circumstances of the patient or the person or the victim of demonic possession, possibly, or there are other perpetuating factors which may be contributing to the presentation, which may take it as a demonic possession. So it's kind of a mind blowing, it's to some extent when you deal with these sort of presentations. So I'll stop there, and I think I'll try to summarize as much as I can, and as we go along in the discussion, I'll be able to shed a bit more light. Thank you.
Excellent, most excellent. Question for you, Doctor. My question to you, Doctor, is what are the common mental health disorders that can be mistaken for demonic possession?
Yes, and you are spot on with that, because let's not forget, there was I did some research last night, actually, as a matter of fact, and there was a latest YouGov statistics in USA, which found that over half of all Americans believe in possession by evil spirits, regardless of religious identity levels of belief. So mental disorder can be disease of brain or mind, or the impairment, which can be due to, Ron, the best way to put it, which can be due to many biopsychosocial factors. You have a biological factor, you have a social factors, or you have a psychological domains, which can potentially cause that or drive that mental disorder. So yes, I mean, you have to really understand the impact of these factors when we do the assessment of our patients. Because let's not forget, so many patients, for example, patients with schizophrenia who behave bizarrely, who are acutely psychotic, or people who dissociate, for example, or they may have a dissociative identity. Then you start to think whether there are any psychological factors which might be impairing. And in the field of psychiatry, genetics has also quite a big contribution to find the etiology of mental disorder. But what I'm going to say for the purpose of this podcast is that the mental disorder, we have to be, as a group, we have to be faced with a differential diagnostic dilemma sometimes. We need to distinguish which of these two entities we are dealing with, whether it is mental disorder, or else we need to find out what the primary problem is, or alternatively, perhaps we need to identify a third independent variable. So it's a very challenging task, Bishop Ron. And we have to be very mindful of what the patient presents with.
Your expertise and your training, people such as us who are in the other side of the table, if you will, we rely heavily on assessments. We rely heavily on investigating the individual, the immediate surroundings. We have to understand that there's a clear problem of whether it's some form of psychosis or it's something else. Now, that something else could be a lot of things. And human nature, as it stands, we majority of our community, we always want the attention of other people, and so this could fall under various personalities that would be drawn to our type of ministry for that to capture that audience, if you will. And so we have to be extremely careful. I want to thank you personally for your involvement in our organization and everything that you do. We are all appreciated. We had a very close colleague of ours, and he was one of our medical people. He was an MD, and he passed away in 2020 from COVID. And so as a result, we feel the loss. So when you came to in our organization, we felt like that missing slot was replaced by someone who cares, someone who's devoted to their profession, and we truly, truly thank you. I had one more question for you, okay? And that would be, what are the common mental disorders that could actually mimic the symptoms of demonic possession? Now, you talked about, of course, schizophrenia. We're aware of that. What are other disorders that could mimic, let's say, the change of voice, the physical changes or transformations, such as the hair changing color? At times, there have been cases of that where the entire eyeballs are either solid black or solid white. which also occurs, which I understand that could also be a medical issue. And then, of course, again, the actual transformation of the skin, of their appearance. It would seem that they're very, very pale, almost to a point where there's a kind of a gray reflection on them itself. You could see that there was something totally and drastically different. And now, since mental health and exorcism, they're so close. There's a very fine line there, and I really do believe that even if a person has a psychosis, it could have been perhaps maybe cause of effect would be demonic oppression, where the impressions of demons can place the negative thoughts into an individual, and the individual, not knowing that he's a victim of demonic oppression, would carry on his regular activity, thinking that this negative behavior is all part of the normal scenario in regards to his path in life. So there's a very fine line there. Now, is there anything that you could tell us in regards to the other disorders that may mimic demonic possession?
Yeah, thank you. That's that's a really hot topic, and many mental illnesses can be confused with possession. And let's say, for argument's sake, as you say quite rightly so, that many possession disorder, they can be classified as, oh, well, this person has got some personality issue or some psychosis going on, or he's just weird. You know what I'm saying? I mean, some of the conditions, some of the disorders, which can mimic some of the presentations, and I'm sure the other panel members will highlight the things about the demonic possession more eloquently. But there are other disorders, like we talked about schizophrenia. Then you have mania, in which the person can be extremely elated. They're highly distractible. They are grandiose. They have a religious belief. They're God, for example. They can have a sexual disinhibition. So that's kind of going towards the realm of mania. Sometimes you see acutely manic patients in an ER, and you have to really try to manage them, not only from the biological point of view, using the medications, but also to de-escalate their mania. But now one can argue whether that mania has got a cause and effect, maybe potentially because of something else going on. You know what I'm saying? Yes. And then there are other disorders like epilepsy, which can sometimes present with it. Hysteria is another one. Tourette syndrome. You have dissociative identity disorder as well. The one thing, like for example, when somebody is in a demonic influence, they have a supernatural knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And the parallels in the mental disorder would be that this person would be hallucinating. They may have a delusion of psychotic disorder. Or they may simply say, well, you know what, God told me, Or the other example I could give you is in demonic influence, you have patients going about naked, for example. They strip themselves off and they show disinhibition. And it is evident is most psychiatric disorders, such as sometimes schizophrenia and schizotypal disorder. And then you may have a supernatural strength because of the demonic influence, for example, and that unusual strength quite commonly also been displayed in bipolar disorder. You see where I'm coming from? So you have to really be very mindful of the behavior you see, bizarre behavior. For example, patient is talking to you in a very bizarre manner, very erratic manner. Their conversation is not flowing. They are just all over the place. And those can be seen also quite commonly in psychosis, for example, But there was Ron, there is an article, actually, I was reading up last night while I was I went to bed and I thought, you know what, I need to do some research into it actually, because it's going to be quite useful for this panel discussion.
Mhm.
And there was an article which was published by somebody called Rubik from a department of psychology it's in Rome, Italy. And what he highlighted in his article that in Rome, there are training for new exorcists in which, in addition to the exorcists themselves, people from the medical field can also participate.
Mhm.
This is one of the ways to reconcile science and religion in a very simple way, Ron, I believe. Neither should exclude the other because that's the only way they can work for the betterment of man. Um, I mean, so we have to be very mindful of that. Many psychiatric disorder can mimic demonic possession or demonic influence or oppression, and a vice versa. So we need to bridge the gap. This is my message, really. We need to really bridge the gap between the practice of spirituality or the Christian faith or any faith people come from. Possession occurs in many cultures. It can be a cultural thing as well. People may have a somatic symptoms, for example. Like that's another example I can give you. Somatic disorder. They may present with lots of various physical health problems. But again, there is no identified physical health problems. So really, it's like an ocean you're diving into. What we are discussing is just like a tip of the iceberg, really. But there has to be a reconciliation between a medical science and the faith, and bringing that gap in. And there has been numerous other researches as well. So then, thus we must keep in mind what my message is really in this panel, that we must keep in mind a truly holistic view of the human condition, which involves not only spiritual, but also psychological, social, and physical dimensions. I mean, we have had quite interesting cases. I can give you some examples. I'm sure many of us know about that. Anneliese Michel, if I'm saying it correctly, in Germany, and in Klingenberg, and of course she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, then some sort of a schizoepileptic disorder. And I did a lot of research into it because I've got a real passion to learn about these things. And as a matter of fact, you know what? I mean, I did actually visit that little place where she grew up and where she was possessed and where she's buried in Klingenberg in Germany. And she still has a grave there, and it's become like a for people to visit and pay the respect, because so she was obviously treated with various psychiatric drugs, nothing getting better, and then she went through various exorcisms. And why go that far? I mean, I think there was in 2022. I can give you, and I'll stop there. In 2022, where did I read it? Yes, there was a article in New York Times. There was a 3-year-old girl, as recently as 2022, in which the relatives were charged in the exorcism death of 3-year-old girl, and so obviously these deaths by exorcism, of course, resulted in charges of the negligent and homicide and felony child abuse. But again, one has to, as a psychiatrist myself, Ron, I keep a very open mind. I approach patients' faith as whenever I talk to them, I do approach patient faith as and when I feel it's appropriate. Because I do feel very strongly that patients' faith plays such an important role in building that therapeutic relationship, and then approach the subject, So yeah, I mean, it's mindful. I mean, I'm more than happy to come along in some other podcast and maybe talk specifically about certain things. You know what I'm saying? So, but this is really great. Yeah.
Okay. What I'm planning to do, and if you feel comfortable enough, I'd like to invite you for our next podcast as well, which is going to be next month. But because of the holidays, I'm going to see how all of our schedules, if they're comfortable with it, with everyone. I think we'll plan accordingly. I'm again, thank you, Doctor, for being with us, and thank you so much. And God bless you in everything you do in His name. I'm going to introduce our next guest, okay? And I am so honored to introduce this guy. This guy happens to be an old friend of mine. I've known him for so many years. He's been affiliated with me, and so as a result, he's one of our affiliate exorcist archbishops. He has his jurisdiction is in Canada, and he was actually trained in Rome. As a result, he's been with our organization, and I'm just so happy to introduce Archbishop Plato Akist. Archbishop, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on the panel. This has been a nice honor. I'm really happy you're doing this. This is actually a wonderful idea of yours, and you're right. We've known each other an awful long time, and I was just sort of pondering. I've been a priest now since 1999, almost 25 years. I don't know where the time's gone, but anyway, yeah. Well, I'm ordained through the old Roman Catholic Church, like yourself, Bishop Ronald. Became an oblate of St. Teresa out of Wisconsin. I was ordained in the States, and then I was later called to be an archbishop. And consecrated in Pennsylvania through the Mexican National Catholic Church, which is down in Texas, and we've got the real good clear lines of apostolic succession through the Apostle James, who went through Spain down to the Americas and came north. I'm part of the. If you ever saw the movie For Greater Glory about the Mexican Revolution, Mexican National Church spawned from that result of. Mexico, but I'm not Mexican, but people who consecrated me are from that. And then we kept the name Mexican because of the honor of the people who were martyred down in Mexico during the turn of the century when Mexican national government wanted to oust the Catholic Church. And the ones who remained behind, the priests and the peasants who fought diligently to keep their faith and won. That's where this sort of spawned. And then when the Pope at the time wanted to reinstill the Archbishop back in Mexico. They wanted to be autonomous because of their faith and didn't want the Rome to do that. So we were granted the autonomy to. So we're recognized by Rome as being valid, like many other churches. So people understand. So I'm independent. I'm an independent Catholic priest and archbishop, but there's many, like the Polish national, the Ukrainian nationals. There's many churches that are recognized by Rome as being valid, but have been given the rights to operate autonomously. But we still follow the same precepts and many of the rituals and whatnot. But we're blessed not to have to worry about the politics that sort of ensues this. But anyway, I've been a priest since 1999, and became a bishop soon after that, and invited, and then I became an archbishop, representing Canada for the Mexican National Catholic Church. But I've been all over the United States, throughout Canada as well, and I did. I'm being independent. We hold jobs. I have a family. I have a home. I have a mortgage. I'm actually a registered nurse. I worked in the ER. I worked in psychiatry as well. I worked in long-term care. I worked in pretty much everything. I did flight nursing for 7 years, been all over the world, bringing people home, repatriating people home. But I always had a keen interest in religion and did my PhDs and went to seminary school, and so I just did my own thing. And then, of course, somewhere along the line, someone gave me a phone call. A paranormal team that got themselves a little over their head gave me a call and wanted me to come and sort of help with a demonic case that they came across. And it was a real one. It was legit. And it was quite an eye-opener for me. So, I went and we did our thing. I learned a lot just from that one case, because obviously it wasn't really well prepared. It is a very specific ministry. It's like you can pastor people, and you can do all kinds of palliation. You can do you can be a preacher, you can be all kinds of sorts of things, and a Baptist and whatnot. But obviously the ministry of exorcism is quite unique, and it has its challenges and it's rewards, like if you want to, when you're successful. But it is very unique, and so I fell into that, and once I got into that the call to do that paranormal event and to do that exorcism, I don't know what happened. It just seemed like that's all I was doing for the longest time, and so now I've over the course of many years I've done many cases, and have been put on many groups of people, and many group paranormal teams have brought me on board as their consultant or their resident priest, if you want. And I'm getting called all the time. I'm consulting, I'm advising, I'm teaching. Then at some point, I came over the year, I started taking courses through the Vatican, through the university, and that's where I learned a lot about the psychiatry part, and into Dr. Jay's points, and he made great points there about learning about the difference between the medical and the faith portion of spirituality. So there's lots there. Like you say, it's a very holistic practice but you need to include everyone involved. I also have to add that to what was said by our good doctor here, psychiatrist, that there's so many different people that need to be involved, and I include the paranormal teams and all the other members, their leadership, their expertise, and all the technical people involved when they do these paranormal investigations, because that's all evidence, and that's all part of your investigation. So so that's pretty much my history. I'm a registered nurse. I worked in the Emerge department. I worked in critical care, ICUs, neonatal intensive care. I've done plate nursing, dialysis. I worked in mental health as well. I've pretty much done a lot. I mean, whole life was nursing, but I do that in conjunction with what I do now as an Archbishop, so I can appreciate the medical components of things. To add to what was already said, which is great, and the medical component isn't just the psychiatric; it's also the actual physical medical part of it, because in our interviews and our investigation, I rely on everything from the paranormal teams who are quite trained and extensive in their technical work and their investigative work to see if there are any paranormal activity that is occurring with the individual or the home or the occupants, animals, everything. That technical part, the evidence part, it's all evidence based right here. And you take the psychiatric part, obviously, is definitely a big part. That is a big component, most definitely, probably most challenging. I don't envy our good psychiatrists. It is quite extensive. There's many challenges and beliefs around the world. I know that I've dealt with many Eastern Rite psychiatrists, like in India, who are very much into the exorcism, where in most Western cultures, psychiatry looks at exorcism as kind of like superstition. They're not really into it as much. And I think I really agree with our good doctor that we need to bridge that gap, because I think it's all very holistically necessary for us to have all those components. Again, back to the medical part is, as a registered nurse, critical care nurse, for example, after our interview and our, investigative work and our interview, and of course, including the psychiatric, seeing if there's existing medical conditions. I agree. Schizophrenia, it's probably the number one. This is probably the number one thing that mimics exorcism more than anything else. But there are ways to differentiate between what is schizophrenia and going on, or the person unmedicated can, I think the doctor can agree, unmedicated, if you're schizophrenic, you can't control that part. But if you're demonically possessed, it will shut off. It will shut off instantaneously, and it's a fine line, very fine line. But there are ways to get around it. But that's for the sake of time. And this is something we can talk about in future podcasts. But the medical part I was talking about is, can this person, for example, if we decide, okay, we've investigated, we've dealt with them psychosocial, we've dealt with issues. Psychosocial, I'm talking about when I personally will interview someone as a priest and I want to get reconciliation. I want to know what it is why they possessed. If they are possessed, truly possessed, what happened? What did they deal with? What did they dealt with? How were they possessed? There's always a cause. It doesn't just happen randomly. It's all by consent. Whether it's direct or indirect consent, and you're aware of that, Bishop Ronald, how people will consent to this. They get involved in all kinds of sort of they conjure things up. They get involved even at a young age. It's sometimes intergenerational. It's something that the parents have been involved in, or there's cases where the parents were involved in satanic ritualists, and of course the children grew up in that sort of environment, and that gets carried on. But anyway, for lack of better words, medical, I'm thinking I speak to the individuals, and I get sort of what's going on, and through a confessional process, people will have extensive guilt, which it's part of them. It's part of the psychiatric as well. They have extensive guilt about something, and they're holding on to something, or they won't let go of something, and that's what's holding them back. So we need to deal with that psychosocial and the environment, the culture, whatever is going on. And then we deal with a psychiatric, any existing mental health issues, because you can be demonically possessed and have psychiatric issues at the same time. It's my training from the Vatican has shown that you can have, some of the psychiatrists that I have spoken to there in the training, that you can possess both. You can have mental health, extensive medical history, whether it's cardiac or whatever, and you can also be possessed all at the same time. So this really throws a wrench into the engine, right? When you have all these things going on at the same time. My point about the medical part is, can that individual handle? I look at the individual. Can you handle what medication you on? Can you handle an exorcism? We do blood pressure monitoring. We do all the stats. We do all the vitals. We're watching the person, and when do we stop? When blood pressures are starting to elevate and the heart rate's starting to elevate. We need to know when can we stop, when it's medically safe to continue. And those kinds of things need to be taken into consideration. So that's why we do an extensive medical history, which also includes the psychiatric, but it's also the medical. Like, if you've got high blood pressure, or you've got, angina, you've got all these other things going on. You've had multiple strokes in the past. There's those things also play a part. Also, you mentioned the 3-year-old child. We need the consent. There's going to be extended consent. There's those things to protect each other. Being liable, taking everything as a very professional manner. There's a lot of people out there that are conducting exorcisms that are ill prepared. I don't think they realize the severity of what's going on, and this is their faith is just as important, and their holistic human condition is just as important as the medical and their faith. And again, exorcism is a Catholic term, but there are many faiths in the world that don't call it exorcism. They call it spiritual deliverance or whatever it might be. But every faith, whether you're Jewish or you're Muslim or you are Christian or you are Catholic or non-Catholic, even non-denominational sort of Christians, will have all sorts of forms of rituals or healings they try to do. But people are the big question is getting a full sort of understand of the person involved, their family, the ones that are around them in the home, their immediate family, even like the children, spouses, either their co-workers, whatever. And then you're looking at their medical, which also includes the psychiatric, their actual medical condition. Try to come down and find out figure out how they got in this condition to begin with it, if it is a true possession or an infestation or even just an attachment. That's how it starts. Find out how this actually started, and we try to go back and where what did you do in the past, or sometimes you don't even know you've done things that you should have been doing. Once we get down to all these information, include the paranormal, if there's a team involved, all their evidence, their physical evidence, their technical evidence, audio, visual, all these things are all included in there, and all the interviews that are being done. And then you include, and I go in one step further, include people who have clairvoyant abilities. I've come across quite a few. I think Sister Lucy can attest to that, and she gets a chance to speak. and I also include that because that person will go in and can sort of sometimes have a feel of what's going on around, and that allows us to have sort of a game plan of how to approach this, and maybe have an idea of why this thing is here, why it's here, how did it get here, who brought it here, and so that's getting to all that knowledge empowers us all as a team to be able to go forward and help the individual. So, and I'll just stop at that point because I can talk about this forever. So, but again, thanks for having me on.
You bet. It's important that people know that members in our organization, the clergy, some of our clergy are medically trained. For example, the Archbishop was just on. He is medically trained as a registered nurse, emergency nurse, which is very impressive. Then we have we have a lot of PhDs that are in the order, that have their own jurisdiction, and as a result, we share cases when someone in that area needs services. So it's one of the functions that we do. I myself, I have a PhD, and I say at least I'd say about half of our clergy are PhDs, and they all have different specialties, which is extremely important, especially when you do a first contact interview and you first do the actual assessment. It's good to have somebody with medical training involved, just in case something could happen. I mean, anything could happen. Okay, I'm going to go to the next guest. Okay, and this person is extremely gifted and talented, and I find it a blessing that I know her. She is a well-known podcast personality. She's very intuitive. She happens to be a Catholic mystic nun who lives in Canada, and she is under the jurisdiction of Archbishop Plato, and her name is Sister Lucy Sophia Marie. So I wonder, Sister, could you tell us about yourself and how you conduct your ministry?
Thank you, Archbishop Ron. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that, and it's a pleasure to be here. Well, a little bit about myself. I experienced the paranormal and demonic, even aliens, as a child. So let's say I was not the most popular, as I became extremely introverted dealing with these issues, where no one really understood or believed me. Open discussions regarding the paranormal or supernatural were not as common back in the 70s, at least not in my environment. I not only had to learn to cope in a physical world as a child, but also in tandem with the supernatural realm. So unknowingly at the time, I was enlisted in God's army in the battle of good versus evil. My childhood and adulthood were the training grounds where I learned combat skills and the use of weapons, spiritual warfare against the enemy. I am a consecrated Catholic sister and assist in the ministry of exorcism, working within the Order of Exorcists, and as well as the Order of Knights of Yahweh, which is a spiritual warfare knighthood. I have various earthly titles and memberships within organizations, but I personally prefer to simply refer myself as a servant of God above all else. I also joined Archbishop Plato, who is on our panel today, to create the Catholic YouTube channel Glory and Deliverance, where we post on a variety of topics as well as prayers, devotions. Basically, I'm here on this earth on assignment, a spiritual mission, shall we say, to help as many souls as possible, especially in the end times.
Most excellent. Thank you so much, sister, for your service, for your dedication, for your compassion, and for being there when someone really needs someone to unload and basically share with. You've been a very good disciple. I'm very, very proud to know you, sister. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Archbishop.
Okay, now I have to tell you that this next guest is really incredible. Okay, he's not only well known as a demonologist in many, many circles, and he's not only an author where he's so talented he could articulate the written word and have you in the story as he shares. And he's not only a really good friend of mine. What else? Well, another interesting thing about this next guest is that he worked directly with the world famous paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warner. And so without any other thing I could say about this wonderful person, his name is Jason McLeod. And Jason, could you tell us about yourself and what you're involved in and anything else you might think is might be interesting for the panel to hear?
Sure. Thank you for having me on, and it's a great pleasure. And I really enjoyed listening to Archbishop Plato, and he actually was at a booth at the Warrens Paranormal Convention directly across from me 2 years ago, and I didn't really get a chance to meet him, but I'm really glad to hear his story. My name is Jason McLeod, and I began in delving into near-death experience studies under Dr. Raymond Moody. Didn't study with him, but I studied his books, specifically Life After Life. And then I got into Dr. Edith Fiore's The Unquiet Dead, and she wrote an entire book about human spirit cohabitation, which isn't possession by demonic spirits, but it's actually being a human body being cohabitated by the discarnate spirit of a human being, which was fascinating. And the synchronicity that led me to start working with the Warrens began when I first delved into their book, The Demonologist, when I was a senior in high school in Westport, Connecticut. And I was so concerned for the families, and especially the children. I said, no child should have to experience this unbelievable oppression. They were being attacked in unbelievable ways, according to the information presented in the book. But I knew that the seed was planted, but I knew it wasn't ready to my time to get involved yet. And then it was 4 years later that another synchronicity happened that actually allowed me to become invited to their class. And the first question Lorraine asked me was, how strong is your faith, honey? And I said, well, I believe that I have immense faith. I believe that I and the Father are one. And it's not that I'm Jesus Christ, but it's that we are all connected to the Creator always, and we can never not be connected, and we're all protected by the Creator, God. And she nodded and asked why I wanted to get involved in work of this nature. And I said I read The Demonologist, and I was terrified for the families, especially the children. And she asked, so it's a calling then? And I said, I believe it is. And so she welcomed me in. And what was fascinating is, I'm trying to condense this, is they sent my friend Lou and I, who is also a paramedic. He was a former Army combat medic. So there's a lot of interesting with the people interested in the medical field being drawn to the paranormal, and then of course the theological, which is what the demonology studies is all about. But they sent Lou and I in our first case the next night, and I was totally blown away. I had my first really powerful psychic experiences, as did Lou and the couple that owned the house. That scared Lou about 50% out the door completely, and it hooked me hook, line, and sinker. So I started basically studying under Ed Warren in 1990 as a demonologist. I was writing a newspaper column called Hauntings for the Sacred Heart University Spectrum newspaper. It was a Catholic university, and so many people were interested in my adventures and what was going on with my work with the Warrens. So I started to write about it in that column. And Ed took me on my first into my first demonically infested house.
and then on some other cases, and a case in Vermont that I'm now writing a full-length novel about, where I had my first empowering, deeply disturbing empathic experience. And I transferred out to Washington State for my English creative writing degree, and the word got out that I'd written a column at Sacred Heart, so they asked me to continue a column at the Spectrum newspaper, the Easterner newspaper at Eastern Washington. And I was actually the president of my fraternity at the time, and the word got around that I was working with the Warrens. You know, they weren't that well known back then because there were no TV shows out there. But we convinced the university to fly them out to conduct their lecture, and then we took them. I had them to the fraternity house, and had a cake and so forth, and had a private meeting. But we went around Spokane and on campus to check out the various haunted locations. But it was such a blessing when I look back at it now, to have been able to study under Ed Warren and to be, working with Lorraine, who was just so amazing. They're just amazing people. And there's a lot of bad press about them lately. And I have to say that I've never had a negative experience, and I've had nothing but positive experiences with them. And they were genuine, and they were, seekers of the supernatural. That's their latest tagline. But it was amazing. And they were my mentors and my friends. And while I was after they'd left, Lorraine called me and asked me to investigate a case in Rathdrum, Idaho on their behalf, because I was closer geographically. And that was amazing. And that's when I first learned and became involved in the fact that there are active satanic networks all over this country and all over this world, right in our own communities, that we're completely oblivious to. And that's one of the situations that I ran into when I got involved in this case in Rathdrum. There were chain gangs. There were people actually being abducted from their cars and murdered and so forth, according to these different legends and so forth. But the case there involved, not only earthbound human spirits, astral projection by the cult leader, Indian spirits who were unable to cross over properly, who were remaining as earthbound spirits for that long period of time, and the satanic element. And I met an amazing a group of amazing people. Two were psychics, and one was an amazing scientist. And they became three of my best friends. And they actually opened I approached everything through Catholicism, of course, because the Warrens were devout Catholics, and that's how I was trained. But that's not going to work for Indian spirits, and it's not going to stop astral projection. So I really added so much to my toolbox. And my purpose is to help people, help individuals and families deal with lingering earthbound human spirits, relatives, and so forth, but also help families with diabolical evil spirits that are attempting to ruin their lives. Upon graduating Washington State, I went back to Connecticut, and back up just one moment. In Washington, I decided to mirror the New England Society for Psychic Research and made the Northwest Society for Psychic Research. Taught a class out there on campus to about 15 people on average, up to 30, about everything that I've been learning, because I felt the information was very valuable. I went out to graduated, went back to Connecticut, and decided to conduct a lecture to share all of my experiences with everybody who was interested. And I became involved in a case when I got a phone call from a woman in Monroe, Connecticut, of all places, the same town that the Warrens lived in, but there were no TV series back then. There was none of that. And based upon the information that the woman was relaying to me, and the fact that she had an inability to reach me, she had garbled phone lines, disconnects, no connections at all. It wasn't until she prayed and begged Jesus to help her get through that she actually did get through. But I knew I became involved in something very, very serious. And without going into all the details, I decided, most of the cases that are the most severe, people will never hear about, because the families want no recognition. They don't want to give the spirits recognition by reflecting upon it. They don't want the ridicule and the scorn and the media circus that takes place, like happened with the Smurl family out in Pennsylvania in a case that was published called The Haunted. But the woman wanted The family wanted no recognition. They absolutely did not want to go public about it. And I thought nobody was ever going to hear about this amazing, mind-bending case until we learned that there were paranormal teams out there by the thousands, and many of them were using Ouija boards inside people's homes as they're there when they're there claiming to help them. And it blew my mind. I called John Zaffis, of course, he's the Warrens' nephew, and I'd worked with him, especially on the case in Vermont. And he said, it's an epidemic, So I called the woman and I told her what's going on. And she said, my God, if you can spare one family from the nightmare that we went through, especially a little 6-year-old girl like Kelly, then just change our likenesses and make sure nothing comes after us like a third time, because they came after them a second time. And I decided I was going to use my English creative writing degree to recreate this case in a cinematic horror format. It's called Dark Siege, A Connecticut Family's Nightmare. And I'm so pleased that I decided to include something totally unique, and that is a chapter-by-chapter analysis at the end, explaining everything that I just told you about all of my experiences growing up, and the synchronicities involved with meeting the Warrens, my first several cases, working with them, what this family did right and wrong every step of the way, how and why these things happen from my understanding of metaphysics and spirituality and so forth, including prayers to St. Michael and prayers, how to pray more effectively for help and so forth. And it turned out to be a big hit. And I go to all the paranormal conventions that I can attend each year. I have also been on 100 podcasts or so on Coast to Coast AM. Paranormal Witness wanted to have the family on, and they said, absolutely not, no way. Because giving these spirits recognition, and here's something I also believe is really interesting, is that not only giving them recognition, but anything that's recorded electromagnetically, right? Whether it's old school, old style film, old style still shots, old style audio recordings on magnetic tape, cassette tape, and so forth, I believe is very, very dangerous. Because you're active, that whole electromagnetic phenomenon and so forth, I think is much more very dangerous. But my purpose now is to help people deal with earthbound human spirits and inhuman diabolical spirits. And I know that, Ron, you do demonic profiling classes and things like that, and might be interested in maybe exploring that. But I do that anyway, but to work for your organization might be something that might be interested. I might be interested in that come in the future. But that's about it, really. I just do all these conventions and help people as I can. I worked with Bill Bean on a case up in New York several years ago, and he's an amazing man. And so I might be writing about that. But writing about these cases that, again, nobody would have ever heard of or heard about, I think is something that's very important, just so people understand, what's entailed. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Jason, for having you for participating in our show. We really, really appreciate your input. This next guest of mine is to say she's special would be I'd be downplaying it. She does so much. She is a radio personality as well. She is also extremely gifted. She's a holistic, a therapist. She is also an entertainer. In fact, in the very beginning of our show, you heard the song, and that was her voice. She's very talented and a beautiful voice. It's my pleasure to introduce Mercedes Luck Benedict. Thank you, Mercedes, for being here.
Thank you so very much for having me on with you all today and participating in this. I feel a great honor to do this.
Actually, it's my honor to talk to you. Very few people I will actually approach who has had the experiences that you had. One thing I did not mention is that Mercedes was also one time a victim of demonic possession. And she came through it with flying colors. And she's going to tell you her entire story. And I can't wait to hear it. So let's hear from Mercedes.
Okay. So So would you like me just to begin just telling the story, or and then wait, and then we'll do questions later, or just you just may talk? I'll just talk.
Yeah, just talking.
I'll just talk.
Just tell people who you are, what you do, what you're involved in, and then your experience as a victim to the darkness.
Okay. Well, my name is Mercedes Lucky Benedict, and for the last, let's see, I guess it's almost 16, 17 years now, my life had taken a turn from being an entertainer, which I was a singer, songwriter, performer. I am an actress. I went to school. I had agents. I was in Texas, and I did all kinds of acting, theater, and all of that. Also in California. So my whole life was actually in the entertainment world. And I also was married at that time. And my husband at that time was also very part of everything I did. We kind of did everything together. We had radio shows. And so around 16 years ago, so back at a certain point in time, I feel as if, honestly, the things that I will talk about in a few minutes, I believe honestly that they have followed me in my life. And so there has been times in my life where I have literally been stopped from many things that were where I should have been going down one road, and then I was just stopped. Some bad things would happen. So we went through a divorce. And I then stayed back and forth. I went to school as a massage therapist, but I had no idea at the time what was about to happen, which just as I was about to graduate, I was in a terrible car accident where I was stopped at a light in Tucson, and a drunk driver hit me, flying down the road 75 miles an hour, and I was literally smashed. I should have died. If my son had been with me, who would have been a little boy, he would have been dead. He was usually always with me. I had actually just been coming out of a therapy session because I was at that time in a relationship with a very not good person that had actually bit me. And I was in a very abusive relationship, and I had just finally gone to get help. Then I'm leaving the office, I'm at the light, and boom, I was hit, and I couldn't walk. And I was in shock. So I got out, and then I went on to where my friends were, and then they ended up taking me to the hospital. And that's when actually God stepped in, because I had to tell them they saw the bite mark. So I'm saying all this because I want people to understand that there are interesting facts in our life that occur that we may not understand what they mean at that time. But I knew that God had stepped in somehow, and once that happened, once the police were involved, then it was a very short time later that relationship was completely severed. And so another interesting thing that happened from that accident was I went into the whole thing where I couldn't work, I couldn't walk, I was in school, I couldn't finish school. I went into the whole routine about people putting you into the lawyers and all that. Well, they could not heal me. The lawyers basically took the whatever money, and so did the chiropractors. And I was still left unable to walk, barely walk at all. I was in terrible pain. Well, so that's when another amazing miracle stepped in. Is the person that I had been kind of hanging out with, doing some music with, well, he had a cousin, and the cousin ended up being a world famous doctor, medical holistic practitioner that had a wellness dental office. It was world famous. People would come there from all over the world. And this doctor said, let me help you. And so I went into Dr. Swidler, and sure enough, he started to work on me with the techniques that he has. And mind you, he is a dentist, but he's a special dentist. We had a body jaw alignment and all this kind of stuff he did. I got healed. But not only that, but there was something that had occurred with this accident, because it shocked me into, like, it was almost a near-death experience for me, where I was catapulted out of my body for seconds as that happened. And it wasn't long after that things started to be where I could see things inside people's bodies. I could hear things. I was, all of a sudden, my whole life changed. And as I started to, shock, not knowing how to even deal with that. But the doctor I worked for was so incredible that, he was like a guru. And I mean, or just a special person that was very intuitive and very healing. So he started to mentor me. It wasn't long after that, though, a few months later down the line, when I was yet in another car accident. I had started to heal up, and then I was in another death-defying car accident where I rolled my car in San Simon, coming home from after Thanksgiving in a sandstorm that had just occurred. Well, the car lost its traction. My son was in the car with me. And all of a sudden, I went out of my body in a way, and I was just holding my son. And then the car just like went, turning, I think they said 13 times. Well, I just asked God, just please, if we need to go now, fine, But what happened was I felt something come over me, and it saved our lives. We did not have, it was a miracle. I mean, the whole car was total, but my son and I were like miracles. And so it was from that crash on that's when my whole life started changing, and I started to become clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, all of it. And it wasn't long after that Dr. Swidler asked me to go work for him. So for most of my life after that, I let go. I did have a radio show on Jolt Radio and BBS Radio and different things. But at that point in time, it was as if God was saying, Mercedes, you're going to have to just, stop doing all that. And you need to focus on working with patients and healing other people. And that's what I did. So it was only just this year in February that Dr. Swidler actually retired, and I was no longer part of their practice, So that was a long time. And in that time, those 16 years, I worked with people from all over the world. I worked with monks, and I mean, it was like one of these jobs or places that I don't know how, it's just God put me there, because I would have never, ever thought that I would be in this job. And so I was helping people, but with my gifts, it was very much, we were very private. This was a private place. I didn't go out talking about it. This was a medical facility, but I had this special sacred space. And I worked with Native American healers. I worked with all kinds of people that would come to this place. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And so there was things that I began getting downloads. A minute ago, Jason started talking about some of the things that I'm very familiar with. I was not before all this. No, I was into some of this, but mainly I was into the world. I was into like just doing what I do. I have a family. It was all about my music. It was all about this, music, acting, whatever, but mainly music. And so my life became totally switched off to becoming focused on healing. I was very much well known as a healer, and I used things as crystals I used all the techniques. I have these things that I do that people would come up to me in these places and say they have never, ever experienced in their lives before. I did not go out and talk about it. It was just, that's what we did there. And we didn't make a, that was just kind of normal there. It was really till after this year when I left there that I realized, and even during the pandemic, that I realized, like, wow, there's still nobody that really knows what I do or what's happening. So I do have this, it's a new journey for me, what I'm doing right now. All of this is kind of a brand new stepping off into the reality of a new reality. Even being on the show to talk about what occurred and what's occurring now is very new to me. So let's kind of go back to where, so a few years back, well, I met my husband, and I met him at the medicine wheel, which is where I was working. And, the interesting thing, another kind of interesting thing here is that when I met Joe, he was working at a haunted establishment that was a place where people go. So there was it's in Tucson, and it was a haunted attraction, and it truly is a haunted attraction. It was actually featured on Travel Channel all on its own. Like before, I think that happened after Joe was no longer with them. But so when I met Joe, I kind of laugh at him sometimes, and I tell him this, like, before I met him, I had many encounters with amazing spirits that were, it was like healing spirits, animal spirits, water spirits, all kinds of spirits from all these different communities and all these different places around the world. So Peru, I'd help people that would come to there from Peru and would work on what kind of, so there's so many different varieties. And so I became very, very good at all of that. And I was very confident. And so when I met Joe, it was like one of the very first sessions that I had done with him was it was all of a sudden a dark shadow man comes out. And the thing is before I met Joe, I draw things. So I would work with my clients and I would draw these things I'd see. If I got a hint or I got a download on what kind of herb they should do or what do they need to do. At this time, I'd never thought this is wrong. I never thought there's anything, I'm doing wrong about listening to my intuition. So I was full into that. So I drew these. I drew the dark shadow man. I drew what I saw. I will never forget what happened. It came in, and it was the most horrible feeling. It stood by us, and all I could do was just talk about what was going on to Joe because he couldn't see it. And I'm talking as I'm trying to pray for it to go away, because that's what I did. I used prayers to go away. And so eventually it did. I did something to say where it went away. Well, I didn't know that was something that was actually going to be coming back into our relationship. This was a very new relationship. And up until one point in our relationship, it went kind of fast, but I had not actually come out to the property, which I live on at this time in Avra Valley, Marana, Arizona. I had not really come out here. I was in Tucson. So Joe and I's first part of our relationship was in Tucson. So not out here in the property. And it wasn't until the first day, the day that I actually started to come out here, that when I drove out here, I thought, I know this place. I mean, I felt like this was like home, and it was very unusual. But that's when things started occurring with Joe and I. There would be, it was just really unusual. It felt like there was always somebody watching you. We were like out in the middle of nowhere. But it always felt as if there was something happening. And then little things would happen where I'd see a spirit, And I would tell Joe, I'm like, there's something over there. There's a spirit over there. And, he would trust what I was saying. But it was almost like at first it was, he was understanding of the animal spirits and things of that nature that I was seeing, like a white wolf or different things I would see. But when it came to things where what was happening between he and I as the months went by, it was harder for him to understand that there was possibly something else playing tricks out here on us. And let me just say that he was also still very much working every day, probably for this haunted place, which was bad, very bad energy, very, very bad energy there, but when you're in the world and you're doing all that and you're just like, well, that's okay. That's nothing, people normally they'll go in these places and not realize, they just think it's all fun. I just want to stay on focus here, but so that's a little bit more about me. So it's basically what I am. So I went from one person to catapulted into another type of life and person. And then I built that life up, and then I met Joe. And so then here God blesses me. And I've always felt as if God just blessed me with meeting Joe. It was a second chance for me. It was land. I love land. I love animals. I was able to start getting these animals out here, and we had horses, which we just lost the other day, but that's really sad. I don't feel as if that was from anything bad from the land. I feel like that was natural causes. But I will tell you that as the next year went by, there was some interesting things that would occur to the animals. And if there was something charging up with us, and every year it would happen, it would be like there would be one thing after another, like keys would be missing, shadow people would be outside. Joe, I felt as if we were being manipulated. I had not dealt with this before, though. I'd only really dealt with like happier things or things that were more medical. So it was very challenging. And so what I did was I started to connect with people that I already knew that could come out here and help me. I know a lot of wonderful people from work. I did too. So people would call, people would come out here, people would see things. I wouldn't tell them what I had seen, but they would see the same thing. There was people walking around like spirits lost. They just walk around. And people would keep saying that there's something going on. There would be portals in the land. And I would see these dark holes and I would draw them and I would see what was in them. And so we started to work with other types of things, like people, we had shaman out here. And like Jason had said a little while ago, I was under the impression that, I was not going in for this. I wasn't going toward Jesus at this time. I was more into, what Native American people would do. And so our healings were sage. We would use salt and sage. We would go through the parameter of the property. I did video a lot of everything. I kind of took note of everything as it was happening. And I would, just used to drive Joe crazy, but I have it. I don't even know why. I was documenting everything the whole time. And there was a time where at one point we had received some, Joe's mom had lived out here. She moved out here the same day I did, actually. And we didn't know it. Well, we kind of did. I think they knew, but she did have dementia. And that was a big problem because she was becoming like a target. And she was very well aware of it too. They were very unique, a unique family where they were very in tune. And so she was very well aware of what was happening. And so that brought a lot of stress to us, where I had to call in a lot of people, just help cleanse the mother, cleanse our houses, cleanse things that, cleanse us. so this was, it was ongoing. So from the day I stepped onto the property, that's when it all just kept going. It never ended. Yeah, so it is hard to talk about. I did not share it publicly. I shared things privately, and it got to the point where I think his mother had left, so we finally were able to get her situated into a better place, because it was just becoming a nightmare with her here and us. And what was in the cabin at that time, so we put this cabin here for her. So originally there was only one main house, and right now we've got all kinds of little tiny houses, and we've got a cabin. The first one was this cabin. Well, it was like you could sit at the front of the cabin and you could just feel what was in here. I could draw like something in that corner of the room. And it was always encompassing this cabin. And it was after his mom left, and that was pretty traumatic too. That's when I really started feeling, because I was starting to be in the cabin more, because all of a sudden we had the cabin. So I put my piano in here. I put my things in here so I could work in the space. The shaman would come out every week, and he would try to clear the portals. He would teach me how to do what he was doing. So I do help other people now today doing what I do, but he would teach us how to go through the parameters of the land and how to sage and how to put the crystals and different things. And then other people would tell me how to do the offerings of things to appease these spirits, because we were thinking this was Native American spirits that weren't happy. But the whole time I kept getting I was getting images. I was getting told by spirit that there was much more going on here. So for me, it became a quest to find out everything I could. What happened here? What is going on here? Why does it look like there's mental patients walking around outside? Why are the natives so upset? Why are these images? There was a point where I could see, laying in bed at night, I would just watch all these people walking through the walls, like lines of people, like one over my head. And then there was another one that crossed over, and I would be like laying there thinking, can they see me? And so being able to see all these things, and then I would draw them. Well, some of this started to affect my marriage, to where, Joe and I were at odds. What was happening, it was as if they were jumping into our bodies. They would jump into us and affect us. And then as soon as we would drive away get down the dirt road, it would be over. It would be gone. He and I both felt like that. If we left the house, we were better. It was like the whole place was just terribly dark. And another interesting thing was there were no animals, like birds. There were no birds. There was no bunnies. There was no nothing here. It was like, it was very stark land. When you look at it now, you see it's not like that anymore. It was a battle. So when I talk about, I think there was somebody had brought up the demonic oppression. So I think, Ron, Archbishop Ron had brought up demonic oppression. So I was so naive and so innocently believing that all spirits were good and all spirits were wonderful and loving and healing, because I'd done that for 7 years, and then all of a sudden I'm with tricksters or entities that I think it took all the way up till the Dead Files. When the Dead Files, I ended up calling them. I tried to call them, and every year, the first year, Joe said absolutely not, because he didn't want anybody to know anything that's going on, because people thought we were crazy of what's happening. And then the next year he said, fine, go ahead. And so then, like Jason had mentioned, I could not send a message out. I could not send it on my phone. I could not do my computer at work. I could not do any, no phone, nobody, no computer could send in and a message to the dead files. They have a link to push, and it should just go right on in there and easily go. I tried so many times with different varieties. It would never work. Our phone calls, if we had the shaman on the phone, all of a sudden it would go zzz. Anybody that was trying to help us, the phone would cut off. It was like we're out in this country little dirt area, and there's only a few people around, and there was like no way we weren't even able to transmit, anything. It was so bizarre. And so when we got to the point where the third year, which would have been 2019, every time we were married in February out here on this property, and that almost didn't happen as well because of things that were occurring. But every February it would be like all hell would break loose, and pretty much it was very bad. It was really bad. And so that it went through, and I'm like, oh my God, it went through. So, but I let it go and I forgot all about it. And then a few months later, we get a call from the dead files. So they investigated us to make sure they knew we were normal. We weren't like crazy people or whatever. And they set us up, and they came out here for an investigation. And it was through that investigation that I really, really learned that, what I had seen all those years, I was validated. I had seen it. I'd heard it. She confirmed the things that she saw. And, there was a lot. There was a lot of murders out here. There was a double murder. The guy was called the devil murderer. And I would see that man sitting in our chair in the bedroom. I would see that man's face. And there was things like that there was a giant called the Jolly Green Giant. They said it blew up over our property in the 80s. And I had seen men in uniform walking around. And so other people had seen them too. So these were special ops men and actual men of the Air Force. They all blew up over the house. There's been many planes blowing up over this area. There's murders that have occurred all through these roads, and we're out in the middle of nowhere. But I found so many murders out here. People just go crazy and they kill each other out here, and there are police reports on it. So I'm going to kind of go backwards a little bit to where after his mom had left, and I became in this little cabin. I'm sitting in it right now. That's what I believe was, occurring in this place, from what the shaman, from what I was seeing, from the portals that we were all seeing, from the things that we were seeing, the black things. I saw these little black creatures. So I started to really become drawn into. It felt like it was absorbing into me. I could sing. I could really bring out these songs were coming out. So I felt as if I was channeling. And at that time, I was channeling. At my other work, I didn't mind. I thought it was okay. I allowed spirit to come through at the other place because they were good and they were helping, and I could just feel as if it was part of what I was supposed to do. It was like I could go to work and I would be normal, but when I'd come back home, I would be not normal. And I felt as if I was something was coming into me. And then it got to be where at one point it was so bad that I couldn't move. And I was there. I have this. I have my table set up again. We had taken the table out for the longest time because I wasn't allowing anybody to come to this property ever again. And because I wanted to have a wellness center here, I wanted to bring people here, and people were coming a little bit in the past, but we shut it down and didn't allow people to come in. And now we're allowing people to come back now. But I had my massage table, and I remember just like getting like something bad just came full force into me. I couldn't move. And I was probably there several hours. I couldn't move. And I just felt like I was pinned down, and like a weight of depression just boom all over me, and I couldn't move. And Joe comes in, and he's like, because he didn't know where I was. He'd known that I'd never come back to the house. You know, it's just next door. But he came to check on me and found me like that. And he was, I remember he was talking to me, and he was trying to get me to get up and trying to, you know, make me move. And he was scared, and I couldn't move. So he called the shaman. He called our friend, and he immediately came out and brought frankincense. You know, he had a whole toolkit. He does this a lot. He helps people a lot. And he saged, and he always brings in God and Jesus. And he always had told us, you need to do that. You need to bring in Jesus. The things that were happening with Joe and I, we weren't forgiving each other because we were it was like they were saying stuff through us to each other, and it was hurting us. And then, so anyway, here I'm laying there, and all of a sudden I was able to, like, it felt like it just went out of me. And I felt really scared. That was the moment when I started really feeling afraid out here. Before, I felt really like confident, like it was just, I wasn't going down the road of demonic ever. No one else did either. It was so weird because I'm so used to working with all these people that were more holistic, and we're not about Jesus, we're not going to the demonic thing, And so that was still before the Dead Files. And I still actually wasn't going down the demonic road on anything until the Dead Files. And then I realized, this is definitely not normal. So I had mentioned on my podcast to Archbishop Ron that there was a time, and that was the time when I decided that we need a priest. And I was like, I started to call people, and I started to, just kind of look into what some different places are. And they just really didn't want to talk. They weren't like, I didn't feel like they were open to what I was asking, or they were not the right people. I wish I would have known that there was a whole group of people like the men and women here. I did not know that. I would have reached out had I known that. So what I did instead was we just kind of rebooted our stance. We did more saging. We did more prayers. Again, I was using the Lord's Prayer, but I wasn't really believing in that faith. And so when 2019 got here, it became it started to get into my body, and other practitioners and other seers and healers would start to tell me they see something in my system, in my body, that looked like a black claw, like black vines in my lower body. And I ended up becoming, at the time the Dead Files was here, I actually was septic. I was like getting septic, and I was very sick when they got here. But when the whole thing comes down at the end, she actually sits and tells you, what she thinks, and a picture that was drawn. And with the pictures that she showed us on TV, they were exactly what some of the things I had actually seen as wispy, nice spirits in the house over me was the evil thing that had these things sticking into my stomach. So talk about shock. I was so shocked that it was like, what in the God, like, how in the hell did that happen? And how could I have missed it? And so I was in great fear from all of this because I was told that the and I knew it. I was the one they were targeting. I was the main one they were targeting. If I loved a dog, I loved my precious dog, that dog would die. It was like if we would try to fight back, an animal would die. There was a time when the horses got attacked, and I still feel as if one of them got cancer, possibly because of these attacks that were happening on them at this time, where I could see this black thing. It just jumped onto the horse's back, and it was like jumping into the it was like a black mist. And I called out for help, and the shaman came out, and we went out there and we did the whole thing. We removed it. This was in 2019 early. So 2019 was a really crazy year where I started to really get these attacks and get sick. And I feel like I might need to stop and say, is there any questions?
Questions for you, Mercedes. You are such an interesting person to begin with, but your experience makes you more so, where I have a lot of questions for you. So are you ready for these questions?
Right. And I didn't get to the Bill Bean part, but I know that in the questions here that you have,
yes.
There's plenty of that where, talks about that. So I know that we'll probably cover all of that too.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, well, you shared your experience of being possessed, and I guess the next question was what kind of demonic entity you had. Did you feel like a personality at manifest? And if so, what was going on? Were you more aggressive? Were you more, or were you just like in the back seat, just witnessing everything? How did you feel?
No, there was quite a variety that would happen, and that's how come we would definitely be. I would, like I said, I had a lot of people that helped us all. It was 7 years going through that. But like what would happen in the house? So in the house area, at a certain area in the back door, and all of a sudden you'd be standing in that door, and like Joe, we would start just instantly arguing for nothing. It was like we were possessed by anger. Both of it. And it would happen only in the door. And it was just like all of a sudden you're fine. And then you stand in a certain area in the door, and it would happen. And then, it was really bad, because then we go down to the shop, or I'd see him in the shop, and he'd be going in circles, like talking to himself. And really, it was like so weird. And I'm like, what is going on? And it's circles and circles talking to himself. So Joe was like an open window. And I guess I had openings too, And so it was really hard, because there would be times where all of a sudden Joe would feel like he's having a heart attack. Like he would get like they would hit him, and I could see things too. I would tell him, like, I'd call him like, Joe, did you just something? I could feel what was happening with him from even wherever he's at. And I'd call him and I'm like, something is on you. And he goes, there is something on me. My chest is hurting. I said, did you just leave from a store? And he goes, yeah. So like, I would literally have to do cleansing from the phone just to get these things off of him. And then he'd be fine. But it was like that. So something happened in my accidents where all of a sudden, like, I could see Joe. If he's walking anywhere, I could, it was like I was there with him. And so I was like feeling all of his stuff when he got, the things would jump on him. And so that was all verified when the dead files came, because the person that was running around in the backyard was one of the people that was murdered here. It was that image. It was that.
Wow.
And so it was like, oh my God. So yeah, and so what would occur was it would be severe depression. It was different areas of the house. Like we have a second bedroom in the house, and the whole house has been cleansed like major, but we have to keep a ward. I mean, we have to make sure we do really good every day. But that room in particular, you'd go in that and all of a sudden you felt like somebody's watching you from every corner or up above, and you felt deeply depressed.
Wow.
In our bedroom, we ended up getting some antique furniture from Joe's mom, and it was furniture that they'd had since they were married, long time ago. And I started to feel as if there was something in that mirror, like we would start to get fighting, and we'd start getting really scared. And I looked in the mirror, and I'm like, something in that mirror. And so we started taking pictures of the mirror, and inside that mirror, I still have the picture somewhere, there was this black face, or some kind of weird black face in the mirror. So that mirror, we had the shaman come out again. He cleansed the mirror, and it kept happening where that mirror wasn't cleansed. So we just took the mirror out and put it into another area, and we covered it. Because we're still learning, but apparently mirrors are something else. So,
Very
yes, we had like everything you have to learn how to do. We had to learn the mirrors. We didn't know everything though, and so we were relying on these stones, and we were relying on this stuff. But I kept seeing that there was something wrong. There was something blood on the land. There was lots of blood on the land. And so my research, I just started, what happened? So I kept finding out that there were digs that the colleges, the university would do, and they'd pick up the bones. And then other people, I'd ask them, and they'd say, yeah, that land over there is cursed. But most people wouldn't know that it was cursed because it's a long time ago. And so as I kept researching, it was evident that there's something going on. This land is definitely, it has a lot here. And we also have, I kept seeing there is a missile silo just right down the road. This year I found out that there actually was a whole Native American tribe, the Hohokam. People had told me, no, they weren't right here. Well, I found it. It's all right there online. There was a huge tribe for a 4-mile stretch. They found all this stuff, and they just, they didn't put it as a sanctuary land. They didn't put it as a historical site. So there's a lot that was tampered here with the spiritual and the Native Americans.
It sounds like you had a lot of multiple things happen.
It's
perhaps maybe a property was maybe a burial ground.
Yes, there's a lot of there's a lot of bodies.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Another thing was when Sanjay, I think it was it was the Archbishop. He was talking about the Mexico and all the priests, right, and all the stuff. Well, that's exactly. That's what I found out, that this was their land. And so what had happened was, there was also some Santeria black magic, and I have also found out that there are many satanic rituals that have been done around here. So the person that was the murderer on this land was a Satanist. And so he, there's all of that tied in. So what happened here was that there was a satanic thing. And so this man that I kept seeing, which finally somebody started calling the Shadow Man. Well, the Shadow Man is the one that was in here that day. That was in here in this room. But he would be, we'd see him in the doors, we'd see him outside, we'd see him different places. Other people were seeing him, not only me, but when I started asking other neighbors and other people had seen the exact same man, the exact same people, right, down the street in another house, or walking down the street, the same man. So this is a whole area that this is covered in this thing. And it just so happens that I'm like the only person, I guess. I don't know. I have the light. I have some kind of light. And so I don't know if it's just because I was here and we weren't moving. We didn't move. I just kept trying to find out how to help and free these spirits that were here, because there's dead children here. There's all these little children that I would see, that people would see, and I'm like, why are these children here? You know, they obviously can't leave. So it's been heartbreaking. It's been rewarding. But the things that would happen to me where I did feel depression a lot. I felt oppressed. I'd have to get cleansed. And when I would do the cleansing and do the healings, then I would get better. I could literally go to work. So I met with a Ho'oponopono practitioner. She came into my life. She was my client at first, and then I realized that, you know, this woman's amazing. So I went under her wing, and she's the one that really taught me about thinking of it as law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And that's why I really went a spiritual law enforcement, and that's what my work became for a couple of years. And when I met Bill Bean, one of the things that resonated with me was he called us agents of God. And so I resonated with him on that aspect, that we are agents trying to battle, you know, these forces.
One thing about Reverend Bean, he is a Protestant minister, but he's a deliverance and he's an exorcist. And a colleague of mine who I highly respect. And so, I mean, that's just wonderful that you could incorporate that into your story, because it's important for people to understand that exorcism is not only performed by priests, they can also be performed by ministers who actually have a deliverance ministry. So this is a very important thing. Anyway, why don't you continue? And then I have a couple of more questions for you, and then we're going to probably have to say goodbye for now, because we have a lot of things that we've already covered, and I think we're over time right now.
Okay. Well, I'll just kind of finish this part up. It is like, after the Dead Files, it was a whole year before things just kept escalating, but that was during the pandemic. And so that's another time where all of a sudden I felt as if Satan himself had just shown up, because I found this story about a tie into the history. And then once I found that tie to the history, all hell broke loose, and my family became at war with each other. And it was devastating to tear my family. All my family moved to the land during the pandemic. And so we were all ripped apart, and there was children involved.
Wow.
And so, I mean, I've talked about this on, when I started to talk about it was after Bill had helped us. And then I started to talk and tell people what was going on. He'd asked me to talk on the show, so I started talking, but it was like, I'll tell you that I didn't believe that it would work. But when I found Bill, we started doing the prayers, and I didn't even know who he was. Somebody messaged me and said, why don't you call him? And so I did. And I just talked to his assistant, Melinda, first, and she gave us prayers, because I thought Bill would have to come here, but nobody could travel. So, but immediately his specific prayers started changing Joe and I. And Joe and I were the base. And so he and I started gaining strength, but the rest of the family was in chaos, and the land was too. And so we set up a deliverance or an exorcism, and I filmed some of it, but now that film is missing. So it's really, I wish I had it, but I don't. Some of it I have, but we had a camera up, but it was miraculous. Like, I couldn't believe what had happened, because Joe and I had been fighting that whole day. It was like trying to stop us from having this thing with Bill that night. It was like everything was going crazy in the house. Electric, plumbing, all kinds of things were just off. And then Bill gets on the phone, and we do the Skype or whatever, and all of a sudden just like starts getting calm, like, and then it was so incredible. Like, and then I didn't realize it, but my youngest son had come into the room, So he was getting this deliverance as well. And I didn't know that till it was over. And then we talked, and Bill took us around to part of the land and part of the house, Joe's shop and our house.
Mhm.
And it worked. The next day, it was like a heavy blanket had just been taken off of us.
Mhm.
And Joe and I started to we were like, wow, the shop was clear. His workshop was always part of it. It ended up that we had to do 3 separate exorcisms. The first one was that. The second one we had where Mark, another family member, had been attacked. So Bill let me do one. So he called, and the whole family got together, and we did a specific one on Mark because Mark wasn't wanting to participate. He didn't believe in any of this. But he ended up having to do this because he got so sick that he just accepted it, and it worked. And then the third one, we had to wait till the family moved out of this cabin. And the couple of days after they finally moved out of this cabin, we had the third exorcism. I call it was the big one, because we had just finally had a paranormal team out, and they had come out to investigate a few days before, and they came out a little bit after his deliverance.
Mhm.
But what they found in this cabin was about 5 different voices talking all at once. And one of them sounded like it was, I don't even know, from a different planet. They were horrible. They were horrible voices. They were communicating with each other. And I no one has heard that except us at this time. I have not shared any of it yet.
Mhm.
But when the next thing happened, though, they were gone. They were gone. All those voices, everything in this cabin was clear. There are still spirits here. There's still children or still different things, but we've never had that same issue with that. We've not had to get another deliverance from Bill. What we do is we do exactly what Bill said. We do complete protection prayers. When we stop at the front gate, we do the Lord's Prayer at the front gate. Joe has built barriers around the whole property. We have crosses on every corner of our property.
Good.
When you go through the second gate, we come through. But when everyone goes to the actual doorstep of their house or their little tiny house,
Right.
we all have to do the Lord's Prayer mandatory before we go into our door.
Very
We
good.
do the Lord's Prayer every single night. Joe and I kneel and we do prayers, and we do everything Bill told us to do. And that's what we do. Plus, Joe goes by his fire every night, and he cleanses and does prayers for everything on the property. And then I do that too. But we have a force, that's what we do for protection. Lots of praying, and we put all these things up for protection.
Very, very good. How is your family now, and how is everybody? Are they still affected, or are they still aware of as to actually what took place?
Yes. So I have my youngest son, who's not so young. He's 25. He just turned 25. He was very affected by this because he was actually in the cabins. When they didn't live here with us. Joe and I lived here. And during around 2019, they'd had this weird thing happen in Wilcox, where a tornado came through. And so they had just come here for a visit prior to that. And then a tornado came through and went over their property.
Wow.
So they ended up staying here and in this cabin. And I was really anxious about that, but I didn't share too much of what happened at the time. But then sure enough, Tristan they both started experiencing the shadow people, children in this cabin, pulling on their clothes. It was just crazy what was happening. And so it wasn't long after that the dead files came. And because there was a flood, they ended up not taking the people that I had on there and put my family on the dead files instead. So it was pretty crazy to have the whole family. But my family was divorced. So I feel as if what happened was it was like God bringing everybody here to me. And then I mean, that was the only way you could look at it. They brought my whole family and put them here. Now, some of us were healed. Mark and Tristan and me and Joe, we were healed. There was others here, and I'm not going to say their names, but they chose to not accept what we were doing. In fact, they laughed at it. They laughed at us. And so some of the questions were, how do other people feel? Well, most people, if you talk about it, they don't believe you. Yes. Or even when they were experiencing the things here themselves, they didn't want to accept it. They didn't want to even acknowledge it. And it was really bad. Like, it was like, instead, I think some of it actually left with them. So, I don't know, for sure all that, but it still did get my family. It still did tear my family apart, but some of us were healed and some of us weren't. But, you know what? I think God gave it a good try. I think God brought everybody here in hopes for a good healing. And I believe that someday, God will help us all to be healed. Everyone's on their own path.
Yes. It sounds like there was a lot of chaos there.
It was.
A lot of things happening all at once. And it sounds like a number of scenarios. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was demonic infestation, where the demonic darkness of spirits will be basically turned loose, and they just have roam of the property and any physical structure, and that's what it sounded like. But then you start talking about bones and the holy sacred grounds that your property is probably on, and if that be the case, then obviously it could be some residual spirits. Perhaps maybe some number of people may have passed on, maybe through some kind of violent scenario, which is interesting because that all was Indian territory at one time.
Yeah, it really was. And just the fact that this plane blowing up with all these servicemen, there was just so many things about this land. And the Brawley Wash, we talk about this. I'm doing a documentary on all of this. I mean, with all the evidence, I've got archaeologists helping me now. I've got the mayor. All these people are stepping in to help me tell this story. And, there's just so much here. And I just believe that if I just say one last thing, is that I believe that I didn't believe in Jesus, but I know that since we changed and we did this, it was the only thing that could stop this, the only thing that could help us really, because the rest of it would just take it away for a week. But this, when we turned our life over and had the deliverances and the exorcisms and changed and put Jesus in our life and our hearts, and it changed my whole life. Everything's changed here. We've got flowers and plants growing. The trees are blooming. The animals are everywhere. And my heart, our whole life, Joe and I's whole life is completely changed. And it's just, there's no other way you can describe what happened. And I'm a kind of person who actually, I knew everybody. I had everybody try to help. All kinds of different people tried to help. And this was the only thing that did it. The only thing.
Yeah, that's great. The power of God is very, very strong. And especially if you have that level of faith, so many things can take place and happen in your favor, of course. I had one more question for you, Mercedes. Okay. What kind of advice would you give individuals who suspect they have similar situations going on in their lives? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I do work with people. I always have, but now I work specifically with it. But I took a year off. After what happened with Bill, I stopped working with people because I didn't want to be tricked again. So I had to put like this really armor and learn how to do the right stuff correctly. So what I tell people is that, I believe that there's many things that happen to people and I could see them. So if I can see them and I know what's happening, but I believe that there's spirits of, there's spirits of hope. There's spirits of in the bottle of whiskey. There's different things. So I believe that people need to be very aware of what they're doing. And I always tell people that they need to, just they need to cleanse themselves. They need to find somebody that can really do the right job. It depends on what's happening in their house. There's ways that they can help in their houses now too. But the main thing is I do refer people off to Bill Bean. If it's something like a case where it's something really big, I refer to him. So I definitely believe that there are people that are much more appropriate to help people. But I do believe that it's about you got to keep your light going. You got to keep a light in you. You got to have faith, because they'll just eat you alive if you don't.
I agree 100%. We're going to have to close the show. I wanted to tell everyone that we are going to be on monthly, and I'm going to have various guests on. Our psychiatrist will be also in our next episode. I do want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank Sister Lucy for all her technical support and abilities. And I want to thank, of course, our doctor and our Archbishop in Canada, and, of course, Mercedes. Thank you. It's such a blessing to hear your story. And I truly, truly say, bless you all. Again, thank you, guys. And until next time, so long. Goodbye.